All right, everybody. This is lesson 8 of the Zero to Hero. The Power Automate saga continues. Today, we bring to you Kent Weare. Kent Weare used to be a Microsoft MVP in all things Azure, Beanstalk, Talk integration. You see his name pop up on your Google searches. Today, he is a principal program manager for the PowerCat team and manages, I venture to say, all aspects of RPA and virtual agents. Kent, the floor is yours. We already took too much of your precious time. Take it away. And um, I wanted to thank you in advance for dedicating time to our community. Really appreciate that.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, and thanks for the kind words on the intro there. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. It should be up here. So let me just get into full screen. As mentioned, yeah, my name's Kent Weare. I'm a Principal Program Manager lead on the PowerCat team. So that's our customer advisory team that sits inside of engineering at Microsoft, focused on Power Platform. Now, the team that I lead is focused on RPA and then also Power Virtual Agents, as Victor had mentioned as well. So in terms of agenda for today, I thought I would start with more of a higher level agenda for this first session. So doing a bit of an introduction around Power Automate, then discussing about why RPA, talk a little bit about the Power Automate architecture. We'll then get more into Power Automate desktop. Of course, we'll see a demo. No one wants to be in slides the whole session. Then I want to talk a little bit about like RPA adoption strategies that you can use with your customers or within your organization. And then lastly, just wanted to touch on a few different use cases that we've seen customers go ahead and provide. Now, in terms of session 2, this is where things are wide open. So really, I'm looking for you folks to give me some feedback. What would you like to see? Go ahead, put something in Teams, and then feel free to go ahead and give the thumbs up and vote someone else's idea up if you agree with that. And much like there's like that fan-controlled football league, we'll do fan-controlled, Power Automate sessions here. So do go ahead, let me know what you want to hear, and the next session, I'll take it wherever you folks want to go with it. All right, and then yeah, of course, I do have Teams open up here on my other monitor, so do feel free to ask questions, put up your hand along the way. Happy to have this as interactive as possible. Okay, so just in terms of Power Automate, I'm sure most folks on the call are aware of Power Automate, but I just wanted to do just a very high level sort of intro here, and then we'll get into more details. So naturally, we've got the Power Platform, which is a collection of different services that allow you to perform and solve different problems. So you've got Power BI for reporting and dashboards and data exploration. We've got Power Apps for cross-platform application development. We've got Power Automate that provides some workflow automation. And then we also have Power Virtual Agents, our conversational chatbot experience itself. Now, what makes all of these services quite powerful is the common underpinnings that do exist in order to have better together solutions. And so we've got things like Microsoft Dataverse, which is a data platform unto itself. It includes rich, granular rollback access control. It also provides a solutioning mechanism that allows us to transport our packages from one environment to another. Connectors is another shared asset that is leveraged across the platform as well. Really gives our platform an opportunity to connect to all of these various systems. And this is something we're going to talk a little bit more later on when we talk about like connectors and APIs versus UI automation and what we should be using from that perspective. And then also what we do have is we have AI Builder, and that's our democratized AI service that's going to allow us to go ahead and build compelling applications related to, say, forms processing, entity detection. We can use it to scan business cards. And once again, the whole purpose here is how can we go ahead and democratize who can go ahead and build out these solutions. Now, in terms of what does Power Automate offer? So really it's automation at scale. And there's a core theme here just across the Power Platform is we want an organization to make the Power Platform approachable in order to bring more people to the proverbial party. That is one way that you're going to be able to scale automation efforts. As Victor mentioned, I'd spent an early part of my career focused on BizTalk Server, and BizTalk was a great tool, but it was complicated to learn. And so as a result, there was a small group of experts, typically within an organization, that knew how to use the tool. And naturally, it provided a lot of value for an organization because you can do all of this enterprise application integration, but with only a small group of experts, you couldn't actually go ahead and scale. And I think that's one of the core opportunities with Power Automate. And we're going to see that with respect to RPA as well, is that using this technology allows you to bring more people to the party in order to go ahead and scale benefits for your organization. Naturally, with it being a cloud offering, the security aspects and governance aspects is quite important. This is something we've learned from customers. We've heard their feedback over the course of the past few years and continue to go ahead and invest in governance and security. And you see that through the COE Starter Kit, see that through the Admin Center. That is naturally something that's important for organizations because there's always this perception that, hey, if my business users are doing this, they're going to get themselves into trouble. And naturally, as part of our scale motion, we want to ensure that we've got guardrails in place so that organizations don't feel risk and are concerned about data exfiltration, et cetera. The next thing is really just around accelerated productivity. We do want our tools to be easy to use. They should be intuitive, really focused on that low, no code experience where we can take advantage of templates and connectors and even custom connectors where necessary in order to prevent reinventing the wheel and really accelerate the time to value. That's a core principle that we have as well. And then lastly, the intelligent automation. I think this is just where the industry is going in general. If I look back to my BizTalk days, there was no sort of intelligent automation. It was just sort of brute force, transactional based integration. And naturally, when we talk about AI Builder and AI and even like, conversational chatbots, it is the opportunity to leverage AI in order to drive more outcomes as well. So when we do say that Power Automate is designed for everyone, we do mean it. And the way I look at this is that there is a complexity spectrum, and that spectrum is going to be from simple to complex. And naturally, when we talk about complex use cases, yeah, you might need to bring your more technical folks into those solutions in order to go ahead and to drive an outcome there. But as we're going to see in an upcoming slide, there's a tremendous amount of, long tail of automation that does exist. And with that long tail of automation, that's where there's an opportunity for more people to go ahead and to contribute into these solutions as part of the scale motion. And then the last thing I'll say is that, IT admins shouldn't feel excluded from this party either. We're going to see inside of Power Automate Desktop, we've got support for things like PowerShell and Python and other scripting languages. These folks need to automate their workloads as well. They need to go ahead and be productive, and they can also take advantage of these tools as well. We see lots of use cases when it comes to, leveraging Azure AD connectors, leveraging Graph APIs, and then naturally bring along your PowerShell scripts for the ride, and then be able to go ahead and to orchestrate all of those from a single platform in order to solve problems. So let's now talk a little bit about why RPA. So I've got just a boring synopsis here from CIO.com, but really you can think of RPA as an application technology that's governed by some business logic and structured inputs that focus on automating business processes. And so when we talk about RPA bots, it's not like a physical robot, but you can think of it much like a software robot that's able to like interpret applications for processing a transaction. Really, you can think of it as solving that swivel chair integration where, historically users might be like in one system and then, copy paste and then alt tab into the other system and going back and forth. And so the way I like to look at RPAs, it's really software that mimics the actions that a user would typically provide, thus freeing them up to go ahead and focus on higher value activities. So sometimes we do get asked about like, okay, well, why Power Automate? Why Microsoft are you getting into this? And if you think about like even historically, like this is an image that's a few years old, right? Like this has always been the goal of Power Automate, and previously when it was known as Microsoft Flow, work less and do more. Want to make sure that people are spending their time where they should be spending, and then the mundane routine transactions, those are handled through robots because they can actually do a better job of it than humans. They don't get fatigued, they can work around the clock, and naturally it leaves space for more opportunities for creative work for people. And this was, I had kind of alluded to this earlier, right? So here's a statement from Gartner that talks about more than 25% of tasks suitable for automation will be automated by 2024. And so what this means is like what's happening to the roughly 75% of remaining, actions, right? This is a huge opportunity for, for your organization to be able to go ahead and take advantage of it, because this means there is a long tail of automation that is ripe for being solved within the enterprise itself. And really, when we think about RPA historically being more of a legacy sort of problem, it still exists. Like every single large organization that we run into has some sort of RPA presence to date. And really what they're looking for is they're looking for more agility and lowering that barrier of entry in order to help scale. And really that's where Power Automate can shine. We've been in this space for a few years already. We've made using Power Automate quite approachable, and we now want to extend that over to RPA as well. So let's just talk a little bit about the Power Automate architecture. And before we get there, let's just take a step back. So when we think about Power Automate and Cloud Flows more specifically, it's very much an API-driven ecosystem, right? If we think back to the Microsoft Flow days and Power Automate before RPA, everything was driven through APIs. Like even the underlying platform itself is built up from APIs. And so this was, a really compelling opportunity for Microsoft to really disrupt this whole ecosystem, this automation ecosystem, because of our APIs and our ability to connect into different SaaS applications. So, whether it's, Dynamics 365 or Dataverse, Office 365, but can be third parties like ServiceNow and Salesforce and Adobe Creative Cloud. Like we can go ahead and automate across all of these various platforms through APIs and really building connector experiences on top of it. And I would say that this is something that is highly attractive for customers that may have an existing RPA tool, as they say, my RPA tool may not have all of these capabilities. So if you can go ahead and provide this legacy automation plus all of this modernized API automation, that's something that's compelling. And so we do recognize when we look across the gamut here of automation needs is that there still is a lot of legacy that's out there. In your organization, I guarantee you, you have Microsoft Excel solutions that exist. And then what you've got is, SAP is still, something that exists in the enterprise. It's very prevalent. And this is a scenario where, yes, they've started to modernize their stack and start to have more and more modern capabilities for automation. But you also do have this long tail of ECC6 and even R3 implementations where you want to be able to go ahead and drive automation for that application. And naturally, SAP provides some hooks to be able to go ahead and call their backend data services, whether it's like OData or it is like an RFC or a BAPI or even an IDOC. But the reality is that there's friction in order to get to that point. And so we have end users that work in SAP all day long, they automate through the front end. And so that becomes a viable option when we think about RPA and automation of be able to drive SAP screens, because there could be some complexities in going ahead and using those backend APIs or data feeds because of some of the complexity and access there. The other realities is we still have legacy desktop applications. We have legacy web applications. These are things that exist, all day long within some of these larger organizations, and they want to be able to go ahead and modernize them. It's just not practical or feasible to be able to go ahead and rewrite these applications. Now, the good news here, and this is what makes our platform pretty compelling, is that Power Apps will go ahead and sort of take away some of these challenges. because now you can go ahead and build out these modern applications more cost effectively, quickly, and without needing sort of this, expertise like this, 10 plus years of app development expertise to go build these applications. So that I think will be interesting to watch in terms of like people taking the plunge and going and migrating or sort of moving to Power Apps. But the reality is there's going to be this, a long queue of other opportunities as well. And these legacy web applications, the people that have built them are typically long gone and they provide some sort of a need. And so RPA automation continues to be relevant for them in order to drive those outcomes. And then even taking a step further back into the past, like we've got terminal applications where you may need to essentially go ahead and create like some sort of like a telnet session or just go ahead and what is it, a TCP 3270 session with some of these applications and drive some sort of mainframe. Those are other opportunities where an organization may not want to dive too deep into that pool, just knowing how complex it might be and how business critical it is as well. And then also we've got this remote desktop application. So things like Citrix are popular. And sometimes it's, companies have used this as like an app modernization. Well, I don't know if I call it that, an app rationalization process where, hey, we don't want to manage this on the desktop anymore. So go ahead and log into Citrix and access your application from that perspective. And this is another opportunity where you can go ahead and use RPA automation to go drive those applications. And sometimes these are also hosted offerings where we see it, especially in the energy sector. People go ahead, build out these applications over Citrix, then give a customer some sort of login to go ahead and use those applications, but you still want to be able to automate it. And so hopefully this gives you a flavor of like why Microsoft has gotten into RPA, because there is a huge pool of applications that couldn't be serviced through just API automation on its own. And so this is the opportunity for us to go ahead and to help drive those problems. Now, as time moves forward, we fully expect that more and more people will, modernize their applications, maybe get rid of these customized applications and move to a SaaS-based offering. And at that point, we're in a good position to service them as well. And so this is really why Microsoft had decided to go after, this specific area. Now, if we think about it, we've got, these two worlds, right? Bridging old apps without APIs, modern systems with APIs. And really, I think this is our strength, is we're kind of a hybrid in the sense that we can go ahead and drive those old school applications. We can go ahead and automate, modernize systems using APIs, but we can also bring those two together and go ahead and have best of both. And so we kind of look at it as using the right tool for the job. And naturally, if you can use an API, we do recommend that. It's going to be faster. It's going to be more reliable. And that's nothing against our platform. That's just like fact when it comes to RPA. And so we do want to give you options from that perspective. So this, I know there was a question in the chat, and thanks, Eliza, for addressing that. And I think this should help here as well. So I'm using RPA in sort of a very generic context. When we think about Power Automate, it's really separated into two core areas. So we've got cloud, and that's really our cloud flows. And within that cloud service, that's where you go to flow.microsoft.com, and you can log in and see all of your cloud flows. And, as part of that, we've got connectors. We've got the cloud flows themselves, or what I'm referring to as orchestration. And then actually we have things like telemetry, right? You can go ahead and see your run history and, follow the breadcrumbs and debugging experiences and see all of that. We also have some management plane that exists there as well. We can see things like the monitoring of machines, monitoring of the desktop flow processes that are running in our environment. And that's all something exposed through the cloud. Now, when we talk about Power Automate Desktop, like this is a client application that gets installed right on your machine. And as part of that, we naturally have the ability to communicate with our cloud flows. And we're going to go ahead and do that through a couple of options. One is we can go ahead and use the existing on-premise data gateway that you've used in the past for other purposes like Power BI, or even being able to call like an on-prem HTTP endpoint. But we also have a more sort of, or I guess a newer approach, which is machine connectivity. And this is connectivity that is embedded right within Power Automate Desktop. And it allows us to go ahead and push data from the cloud back down to the desktop and then it basically provide instructions on now go ahead and execute this specific desktop flow. So we've got this connectivity layer that exists, and then we also have actions that exist inside of Power Automate Desktop. So you can kind of think of them a little bit like connectors in the sense that they go ahead and perform specific operations, perhaps like opening an Excel document, adding a row, deleting a row, etc. And then naturally, we've got some level of orchestration or workflow that exists inside of Power Automate Desktop as well. And so you're going to see this. We can go ahead and sequence our steps, have conditional logic, things of that nature. Sorry, I got a doorbell here, but we'll ignore that. And we basically can orchestrate some of those processes. So this is just a very high level architecture. Obviously, it's more nuanced than this, but this will give you sort of a flavor of where our components sit in the stack itself. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Power Automate Desktop, and I'll show you this directly in the demo. But this is essentially it's a desktop application. It gets installed, on your machine. Now, something that is interesting is that this is now included with Windows. So especially if you've gone ahead and updated your machine to Windows 11, you're going to actually see Power Automate Desktop automatically installed for you. Now, it is free to use. But there are some limitations of it. On the previous slide, we talked about orchestration. And in order to kick off any sort of RPA process, you are going to orchestrate that from the cloud. You're going to use all of our triggers to go ahead and to do that. Now, when we talk about the free version of Power Automate Desktop, you can go ahead and leverage all of these various actions and sort of build out your desktop flows, but you can only go ahead and manually run them. So you're going to go manually click a button in order to go ahead and to kick them off. Otherwise, you're going to be in some sort of a paid SKU where you can go ahead and then take advantage of both the cloud flows plus the connectivity and then your desktop flows to really build rich end-to-end experiences. So if we double click on this and say, okay, what is inside of Power Automate Desktop? We're going to go ahead and see things like the actions on the left-hand side here. So, if we want to go ahead and manipulate files or folders, we've got recorders. We have the ability to go ahead and record like a desktop or a web application. And any steps that we perform in those applications are going to be recorded. And then we have the ability to go ahead and play them back and essentially pass in variables to make these scripts dynamic in order to go ahead and mimic those actions that an end user would typically go ahead and perform. We do have like rich debugging features where you can set a breakpoint, inspect any of the sort of the, kind of like an add watch inside of Visual Studio. That exists as well. And then we also have support for advanced coding or scripting. So VB script, JavaScript, Python, PowerShell, executing command lines, commands are all part of this experience as well. And then what this also allows us to do is we can go ahead and run in what's called an attended or unattended execution mode. So attended is what I'm going to show you. It's something where you're going to see it pop up. You need to be logged on, have an active session on the device that you're going to call, and it'll go ahead and run. And then we've got unattended. You can kind of think of this more like back office, right? You've got processes running that maybe accept an email or looking for emails in a specific mailbox. You want to then go ahead and insert an invoice into some sort of ERP. You want that running all day, every day. And this is something where it'll go ahead and log into a machine, do the work that it needs to do, and then go ahead and log off from that perspective. I touched on this a little bit, but this is kind of I'd call it table stakes for a lot of RPA, tools. And that's the recording experience. And exactly how I explained it before, you go ahead and you record the actions that you would normally go ahead and perform. Then you can go ahead and like test it out, automate that task, and then you can play back that task. And then what you do is you go ahead and replace your hard-coded data that you would have typed into the system itself, and then you can parameterize that through the use of inputs and outputs. Then go ahead and drive those applications based upon those inputs. So the inputs can come from the cloud itself. It could be captured in a form. It could be, through an email. It could be through a record in a database. And then you send that information down to the desktop flow. It'll execute, and then you can return statuses and output variables back up to the cloud that can then be used in downstream subsequent actions as well. So let's go ahead. Let's just jump into a demo. There's kind of no substitute for that. And just show you exactly how this works. Okay, so this is Power Automate Desktop. This is just, running on my machine. It's something that I've got installed. It is environment aware, so I can go ahead and see all of the environments that I have access to. And then what I can go ahead and do is create, say, a new flow. And I'll just go ahead and provide a name here. So we'll call it pad demo. And then I can go ahead and click on create. And so this will just take a second. And then we're going to essentially have our canvas that we can go ahead and start to automate. Let's see what's going on here. Here it is. It's just loading. Okay. And so on the left-hand side, this is where we have all of those built-in actions. So if I wanted to go ahead and say, look for something related to files, like I want to go ahead and, wait for a file or, check to see if a file exists, copy a file, move a file, I can go ahead and do so. We've got some pretty cool support for Excel. So maybe if you folks want to see that in the next session, we can go ahead and check that out as well. But these are kind of those built-in actions, built-in functions, kind of like a connector, just a little different in the sense like we don't have connections and we're not, connecting to APIs, but essentially reusable functions that we can go ahead and use. Now, what we also have is those recorders. So both for web applications and desktop applications. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and click on desktop recorder. And then we're going to go ahead and just automate a specific application. And then what we'll do is, we'll update, create a record or transaction in that application. And then we'll be able to go ahead and, capture all of those steps that were involved in that process. So let's go ahead and just click on the record button here. And then what'll happen is it'll start to record everything that I go ahead and do. So in this case, I'm opening up this Contoso invoicing application, and you can go ahead and see when it highlights something in red. That means that it's gone ahead and detected a specific object itself. And so now we're in this specific application. And if we want to go ahead and click on, say, invoices. Sorry, I'm seeing a little delay here. I think it's related to Teams itself, but here we've gone ahead and clicked on invoices, and it can detect that. Then what we want to do is we want to go up here to the new record button, and it'll detect that, and we can go ahead and click it. Then we want to go ahead and provide some values here. So for accounts, we can go ahead and just say that this is Fabricam. And then we'll go ahead and click on this next field, which will be contact. And then we'll go ahead and click on amount. And we'll just say it's $2,000. And then we can go ahead and click on this drop down, select invoiced, and then go ahead and click the save button. And then at this point, we've completed our process. We can actually go ahead and close it as well. We can now hit the finish button, and it is going to basically save that script inside of Power Automate Desktop. And so that's going to go ahead and allow us to go ahead and call those specific steps that we have in the past, like that we just recorded. And you can see all of the hard-coded values that do exist here. And this is where we can go ahead and replace those with different inputs from that perspective. So what I'm going to do, just in the interest of time, is I've got one that I've built previously, and I'm just going to go ahead and open that because I've already gone ahead and created those inputs and outputs. Okay, so it's coming up here. I Last night I had this little icon that says restart for update. And what I learned this morning was that that restart for update included an update to Windows 11. So I think I'm sort of feeling some of the migration blues here in terms of my machine being happy with all of this software running over a team session itself. So this is very similar to what I'd shown you before. What I have done is I've gone ahead and created inputs, and I can go ahead and hard code values that I can use in my local debugging. And then instead of having the hard coded values, in these specific steps, I can go ahead and refer to these inputs as a way to make this dynamic. So if I go ahead and just run this specific script, it's going to go ahead and it's going to open up that Contoso invoicing app. It's going to use all of these inputs and the hard-coded sort of the default values, and it's going to then populate that desktop application. And so you can sort of envision, historically that, someone would get, say, an email with an attachment, maybe a PDF, and it contains this type of information. And for every email that comes in, they then go ahead and copy and paste that information into that specific application. Now, that isn't sort of the best use of people's time. And so as a result, this is why RPA is value add for organizations, because this isn't overly like value add work from that perspective. Now, the one thing I do also want to show you now is how we can go ahead and connect from a cloud flow to this specific desktop flow. Well, I'm just going to create just a very simple cloud flow with a manual trigger. Let's go ahead, just add a few inputs here. So here we'll have one for amount, we'll have one for account, and then we will have one for the contact. Okay, and then let's go ahead and add our desktop flows. Now, when we go ahead and add a desktop flows, we do need to have a connection. Now, let's see, I should have a connection established here already. Okay, well, let's just create one just because that'll show you the experience anyways. So what I can do is I can choose whether or not I want to use the on-premise data gateway or connect directly to a machine. Now, as part of my installation of Power Automate Desktop, I do register my machine to a specific environment. And then here I can go ahead and provide like the domain and the user in order to go ahead and connect. And so this will allow me to go ahead and create a connection, and this will then be able to tunnel requests from the cloud down into my desktop device in order to go ahead and execute a specific process. So here, we're going to go ahead and call that demo. We're going to choose to have it in attended mode. And then what we can go ahead and do is pass in dynamic content into this specific desktop flow in order to make sure that our process is dynamic. And let's just go ahead and hit save. And then now we'll be able to go ahead and run this. So let's click on manually kick this off. We'll have a connection established already. Then we can go ahead and provide some values here. Let's make it different, 10,000. We'll say that this is AdventureWorks. And this is, now we'll go ahead and run this flow. So this is being orchestrated in the cloud. And then, the connection's being established. The desktop flow is then going to get launched, and it'll go ahead and run the script. And that script naturally is going to go ahead and drive that legacy application from that perspective. So I see a question. Just this will take just 20 seconds or so to run. Can I use Power Automate Desktop as a test automation tool? So you can. It's I would say like it's not its sort of intended purpose, but that is naturally there's some similarities here. Like previously, before we got into Power Automate Desktop, we did have Selenium as part of our stack. Obviously, Selenium is a tool that you can use for testing. Now, what we would say here is like we're not going to have like all of the tools that are part of an existing test suite where you've got, assertions and things like that. But we needed to do some load testing for a PVA chatbot scenario just a couple weeks ago, and we've totally used Power Automate Desktop to go ahead and do some load testing on PVA. Don't tell the engineering team we did that, but we needed to go ahead and create a bunch of data so that we could, validate our analytics template that we had published on that front. So it can be done. Just don't expect it to be sort of the same level of sort of sophistication from a testing perspective, since that's that's not sort of the intended intention from that perspective. So we can see this is now completed. We saw this running. We should see this is now green, and much like we would expect with Power Automate, we can see all of our inputs and outputs. We can see the sort of follow the breadcrumbs when it comes to desktop flows as well. If we go ahead and click on see run details, we would see all of that. So I'm going to keep moving just in the interest of time. We still have a fair bit of content to go, but yeah, that's just sort of your hello world sort of intro to Power Automate Desktop and RPA. And if there are questions, keep them coming. I'll sort of keep an eye on them as we get through this. So next up, I want to talk a little bit about adoption strategies. So what naturally happens with organizations, and oftentimes this will come from customers that have existing RPA deployments. And what I would say is traditionally, RPA has been more of that, center of excellence delivered approach, right? Where you've got a group of experts that really understand RPA tools, but there's a smaller population of those people. They typically work in the same team, and they go ahead and build out automations for the business in very much a project style, sort of traditional IT project, type of initiatives. Now, what we're trying to do here is, much like we want to democratize who can build apps and who can build cloud flows and who can build chatbots, we also want to democratize who can go ahead and build RPA bots. And sort of the way we see this is, establishing a center of excellence. And the purpose here is that you want to scale automation to your organization. And the way you do that is really through consistency and, I would call it guardrails governance. And what you want to ensure is that people are going through a similar path and that they're using common approaches to solve these problems to go ahead and to provide benefits for an organization. If everyone is continuing to reinvent the wheel, you're not going to see the same level of benefits if you've got sort of, using shared capabilities and not sort of duplicating different processes, but rather identifying that, hey, this is a use case, it's been solved. If people want to be able to leverage it, then they subsequently can. The other thing that is super important here is that if you start to use a common approach and you actually, for example, using like a template, like inside of Power Automate, you have a cloud flow, you can go ahead and publish a template as an organizational template that everyone should go ahead and use. And as part of that, you have like your try, catch, exception handling. And you can also include things like, specific logging events, like say through a custom connector for logging. What this then allows you to do is that ensures that for every time a specific process runs, you're capturing that telemetry, including was it successful, did it fail, and how many times has it run. And then even better, if you're able to then go ahead and tie it to a specific idea that you've captured, in some sort of system. It could be what we offer in the COE starter kit, just around like being able to identify these opportunities. But that, I think, is really the secret sauce of, building out an RPA platform, is being able to get people through a common life cycle patterns through, idea generation and training, and, ensuring people are designing and building their automation processes properly, then going ahead and, having a common set of components that can be used, like those patterns, having some sort of logging in place, having DevOps pipelines so that you can go ahead and move your bots in an efficient manner, then being able to go ahead and also automate and manage your infrastructure components. Now, when we talk about Power Automate Desktop, we're talking about machines that need to be managed. These machines need to be patched. Power Automate Desktop is released every single month. We provide an update, and that's where we want to be able to go ahead and provide guidance and the tooling to help support the management of those specific aspects as well. And then naturally, you're going to have your various security and governance constructs. A lot of these are the same. You got DLP, environment access, role-based access control, and then the data. And there's definitely some work to be done in this area. But if you're going ahead and logging all of these requests and you know what the outcome is, then you can go ahead and show back this information to your executive sponsors. And so something I do want to talk a little bit about here briefly is like sometimes people look at RPA and Power Automate Desktop and they go, oh, it's too expensive. And what I would argue is that no, it's not too expensive. You just haven't articulated the right business case. In my career, which is quite a quite a long time at this point, I've never seen basically an opportunity for ROI like RPA. And the challenge is if you can go ahead and catalog the types of processes that you're automating, and then being able to link that to your runtime telemetry in order to provide a picture of the business outcomes that you're deriving, that is gold. That is like your opportunity to prove to leadership that, hey, this is working. This is the tangible benefits that we're getting from this. And then it's the opportunity to go ahead and invest more because it's very clear what you've done. Sometimes I think, Power Platform, we just kind of say, everyone go forth and do, but without being able to link back to some sort of tangible outcome. And then people go, hey, I've got a bunch of this stuff here, but how do I go ahead and sort of bring this all together? And so that's kind of I would call it the secret sauce here. Okay, just a couple questions here. So Power Automate Desktop in the Microsoft Catalyst perspective. That one, to be honest, I'm not overly sure. But if you want to, go ahead and send me an email, I'd be happy to follow up on that. Basically, it's first name dot last name at Microsoft.com. And then Victor, do you see RPA metrics providing backing for systems or tools to be upgraded? Once the automation is done, RPA eliminates the argument for updating systems. Okay, so I think I understand where this question is coming from. So I think in some ways this is deferring, say, system upgrades or system modernization. And I think in some ways RPA absolutely does that. Like, quite truthfully, I think that is the case. And, I think it still becomes an opportunity. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this in one of the use cases because I think you touch on a good point here. There's going to be some level of a tipping point where you want to be able to go ahead and sort of just automate steady state because that's seen as the path of least resistance. And there's going to be some times where it's like, it just doesn't make sense to do this with RPA. We should just build a Power App. And so I'm going to give you one of those examples. I think it's very much going to come down to complexity, and there's a lot of things that go into this in terms of like, what is the system doing? What is the change management associated with it? Are there cybersecurity risks that are just we don't want to take on anymore? There's a lot that goes into that. So it kind of depends, but I'm going to give you an example at the end where we'll talk a little bit about that. Now, once you've got like your governance in place, what we want to then do is how do we sort of evangelize this? And we've done this with other customers. And actually, one of the customers came up with this term. It's not ours, but I'm just borrowing it. It's really bot wars, right? And so we think about, okay, what is bot wars? And so bot wars is something that you can combine with some sort of training exercise. So we have tools and basically literature and a training program called RPA in a Day. And partners can go ahead and deliver this. Anyone can download it. It's in the call to action notes at the end. And you can go ahead and go through a one-day training course. Use the tool that I just showed you, that Contoso invoicing application, and really go through an end-to-end experience, learning Power Automate, Cloud Flows, AI Builder, and Power Automate Desktop. Now, what we've done is we've taken that approach and then sort of combined it with a bottom-up innovation program, where it's one of those things where you don't want people to go to training and then they don't use their training, so they forget it. We want people to have some sort of an outcome from this. And so what we do is we put together a little bit of a program that encourages creativity, autonomy, accountability. and allows people to get into a small group, like a fusion team. Ideally, it's a mixed audience where you've got some technical folks, some business folks, and work together to go ahead and solve some sort of a business problem. And so we see this as a multi-week engagement. Sometimes we see people trying to cram this into 2 or 3 days, but I don't feel like there's the same level of outcome that you see if you give people a little bit more time to execute on this. Naturally, having some sort of strong leadership or sponsorship is super important here, because it allows the people participating to prioritize their time. And really, I think the important thing here is you need to show some sort of outcome to leadership. And if you can, they're going to fund more, and they're going to be quite impressed with what you have. So this might sound a little bit about like a hackathon. So what's the difference? So hackathons are great. Like I'm not denying that. I'd say the problem is, people go, they get excited, they do something over a short period of time, then they leave, and rarely are those solutions taken to production. Now, naturally, people might take learnings that they can apply to the next project. They might learn some new things, meet some people. Those are all great things, not discounting that at all. But with Bot Wars, what's really important is that we've got some measurable outcomes that are impactful to the business. Because the RPA software that costs money, there's no question. And so you do need to be able to show that, hey, we're going to invest money, time, in terms of people's time to go do this. We're going to spend some money on licenses, but there's going to be an outcome that is good for the business that warrants the investment itself. And the other thing is, like, we've all been there. You learn something quickly, but if you don't apply it, it's going to go stale. And so this is that opportunity to have a little bit of an immersion in the technology over a period of 4 to 5 weeks to go deeper in it. And this is where I think it becomes pretty powerful. And this speaks to some of the bottom-up innovation, thought leadership, is that, the people that are closer to a problem are typically in a better position to solve the problem. And this is where, like, that fusion team comes into place, where it becomes a great combination. You've got some folks that may be more technical, that can handle some of the more technical complexities of this. But then we also have, like, people that might be business SMEs that understand the problem. I don't know how many times I hear, oh, like, what are use cases around RPA? And I'm like, they're right under your nose. Like, all you need to do is go, like, have a coffee with someone that, like, works in a business unit, go shadow them. Guaranteed you're going to find these use cases. And that's why bringing the Fusion team, being inclusive, really yields to great outcomes. So what you do is you break into small groups, from your training program. You get, maybe 2 to 3 people, depending upon the size of the group. It is important to have some accountability here. You want a single person that you can say, hey, like, what's the status? And they can go ahead and do it. So identify captains that can help facilitate these sessions, amongst the small teams. Go ahead, identify 3 business opportunities, and then go ahead and prioritize one of them. Now, why 3? You want to have this catalog. You want to be able to say, after you've done the first cohort and you've impressed your leadership, they go, what's next? And you're like, boom, we've got a backlog. And then you can start to execute, and you really becomes a bit of a flywheel, and you gain a lot of momentum. And then, when you think about ideas, make sure that they are tangible, they're realistic, and there's something the team can execute on without a whole lot of dependencies. So needs to have business value, but don't shoot for the stars and that you can't finish it in a short amount of time. So I'm gonna have to move quickly here through the next few slides, but go ahead, prioritize milestones. What it is you want to have some lines in the sand in terms of, like, who's got what, when is it going to be done, just as a forcing function. Make sure people are getting their work done. You want to share these milestones, make it transparent. Once again, a bit of a forcing function, but it can go a long way in terms of, like, hey, accountability, you've got this, you said you'd do it, why isn't it done? And then you want to have a midpoint check-in, bring all of the teams together, get them to all present, show where they're at. Once again, a bit of a forcing function. There's a bit of a theme here, but it is a learning exercise. So ask, what have you learned so far? What would you do differently? Are you blocked on anything? Because the goal is people should be successful, and that's where the leadership needs to be able to help here. It's like, hey, you can't get so-and-so's time. Let me go talk to their leader. Is it something where it's like, hey, I'm stuck? Maybe another team solved that. They can say, oh, well, hey, we solved it like this. And you start to create a bit of a peer network as well. And so the whole purpose here is it should be open, friendly dialogue. It's not a test. Like, people shouldn't feel like they're being graded here. Then, you go away, you work on the problem for another 2 weeks, And then you bring it back to a final showcase day where everyone can go ahead and participate in a presentation. Generally, it's a combination of slides where people talk about the business problem they're trying to solve. They're projecting what the outcome is, the benefits of the organization, and then having some sort of a demo in order to like sort of prove that they've done what they sought out to do. Then this is huge. Like celebrate the success through recognition. And this is where the leadership is super important as well. Like some of these people may not have had opportunity to present to leadership. I know in one of these situations, like the teams presented to the CEO, most of the people in the room had never met the CEO, let alone presented to him. And then this was an opportunity like, wow, like this is unbelievable what have people have done here in such a short amount of time. So that's super important. Now, in terms of lessons learned, like it's sometimes some of our customers have gone like super competitive on this. It does raise the bar. Like they've used analogies like Shark Tank, or in Canada, we've got Dragon's Den. But, think of it as you're pitching. You're pitching your opportunity to a set of leadership. Like, is it something where they want to invest more in this? We had one customer, they even gave like away $6,000 to the winning team, for them to share. It could also be just like gift cards, or just recognition goes a long way. And then the last thing is like, don't forget about the last mile, the path to production. There's always some time. You might get a fully working POC, but there's still some like change management. There's some operational ownership that's part of it as well. And you need to go ahead and sort of think about, it's only provides value if it's in production. Otherwise, it's shelfware. So you do want to make sure you close the loop there. So quickly, just a few different use cases, and so this is one. This is a public case study, so I can share the name. It's Coca-Cola bottlers, United Bottlers more specifically. And if you've ever gone to like Subway, they have those like fancy Coke machines with all the cartridges, and your kids go make like some horrible tasting drink. Like that essentially is this process where these restaurants will go ahead and request different cartridges because they're running low. And historically, that's been like a manual process where someone would call essentially like a customer service agent. They would track the request inside of Excel. They would create a PO. They would do some sort of like translation inside of the spreadsheet. They'd print everything out. They would go ahead and like check an email for an invoice, check the email for delivery, create the order in the supplier system, carry the documents to accounts payable, scan documents, validate the OCR, release the PO and the invoice. Like these are all steps. Like you can see here, we've got multiple steps in the mix. We have multiple people in the mix. It's a lot of mechanical work that's going on here. And so being able to go ahead and use RPA to automate these steps, was something that they took advantage of and saw some great benefits of. Victor, this was the scenario I was talking about. This is a perfect example of where you might want to do some modernization instead of just using RPA, but it's still a valid use case. So a large retailer, and so what they have is, it's a pretty big company, and they've got various business units, and every month they need to go through like a journal entry submission process where they need to provide accruals. Every big company goes through some process like this. And so what they do, or historically did, was like, they would go ahead and fill out an accrual template. They would send it to a shared mailbox. And then like the RPA bot would go into the archive, or make sure there's an archive of that file, do some data validation, some checksums, and then be able to go ahead and send it off for an approval. And after going through all of these different hoops, this files are basically just moving all over the place. The bot will then go ahead and upload the data into an ERP. Now, you could argue this one, instead of everyone having spreadsheets and emailing them around, maybe you just have a Power App, and you go ahead and you capture all of the accrual information just as you saw. Now, instead of doing this data validation down in these steps here, you do that right in the Power App. You do it right up front. Like there's an integration, a comment saying don't pollute downstream systems. And so you capture good data up front, and then it flows through the rest of the systems properly. So you could do a lot of that inside of Power Automate, or sorry, Power Apps. And then you can still leverage, your approvals inside of Power Apps and Power Automate. That's cool. And then maybe you store it inside of Dataverse. And then from Dataverse, there you automate the last mile, and you automate from Dataverse into ERP. So this is an example of where like RPA is solving this problem. It's way better than a lot of manual spreadsheets moving around, but you're still moving spreadsheets. And so this would be an opportunity to say, hey, let's take a step back. We can go ahead and modernize this, build a Power App, still have downstream automation, still get benefits, but is a good use case. Now, in this case, Excel is easier to break away from than perhaps some like legacy web app that is quite complex and took a long time to build, and let's be honest, a long time to unwind as well. Then the last one, a very common use case, especially in energy, is like vendor enrollment, where you need to go ahead and, someone's going to, do business with you, and you need to go through a process to sort of validate their information. Oftentimes it's their corporate certificate, their banking information, and it requires a lot of back and forth, oftentimes through emails, sometimes through forms. But this is another use case where, you can go ahead and send an electronic form out to the vendor. They can fill it out electronically. Then you can capture that information itself. Could be as easy as a Microsoft form. Then be able to route it for approval. And once you've got that approval, then go ahead and register the business partner inside of SAP, and send these confirmations and notify the vendor itself. So highly manual process, super popular. Every big company has this one as well. And it's an opportunity just to focus on the higher value work, and to be able to like track all of this work as well, along all of the various steps. And so this would be an example of like human in the loop, where you've got some checks and balances, and you're able to sort of involve a human, say, through an approval process. And so they can scan the information and say, yeah, that looks valid, like that seems reasonable. And then the rest of it becomes automated. And so that's another sort of, I would call it, perk to our platform itself, is that we can handle those scenarios with approvals, whether it's like Power Automate approvals or even Microsoft Teams. We can go ahead and do that as well. So I know we're pretty much at time here, so I do want to just leave you with some resources. That RPA in a Day content, you can go ahead and download that here for free. You can sign up for trials. There's no obligation there. Some other resources, PowerCat, so the team that I'm part of, we have an automated channel, or I guess playlist on a channel. And we talk about RPA and patterns and governance, and so that's a good resource to check out. I spend a lot of time on my personal channel as well, just sort of sharing the learnings that I run into every week working with customers, and so you can go ahead and find that there. Go ahead and follow me on Twitter, at Weare, and then come to our next session. If you enjoyed this, look forward to seeing you next week. And then also, if there's things you do want to see, go ahead, put that in chat as well. Happy to do that. So we had one question: coding skills mandatory to learn and master in Power Automate Desktop? I don't think so. Obviously having some technical skills will help with some of the more complex use cases, but certainly not coding. Sometimes you get into situations where you need to query databases and stuff like that. So being able to do some SQL stuff, but generally no. Like, we want it to be intuitive. It's certainly not a prerequisite. There should be a lot of things that you don't have to go too technically deep into. I would say the most important ingredient is passion, right? Like your passion to go solve a specific problem. The rest of it, should be reasonably approachable. You may not get it on day one, but sort of the more you work into it, the sort of more familiar you become with it, and it becomes second nature. So yeah, any last sort of minute questions? I'm happy to stay on a couple minutes if there's any questions. But otherwise, thanks for joining us here today, and do let me know what you'd like to see next week.
The mute button played a joke on me now. Yeah, you can contact Kent directly through LinkedIn or Twitter, or you can send me an email if you want to submit a theme for next week. Kent, I saw that you mentioned there the 27. We're actually looking at the 28.
Oh,
So
sorry,
it's next Thursday.
28.
It's
My
all
bad.
good. It may be 27th somewhere in the globe, but yeah, it's October 28th at 12 p.m. So we have this time together again. Thank you so much, Kent. This is I don't know how everybody felt, but it's a lot of information, good information for us to digest. And for me though, I look I have my study schedule, if you will, but I look a lot into Power Apps, of course, Power Apps portals, and some of the Pro Dev in Power Platform. And I have been putting off RPA for too long, I guess, and I have to to put time into learning it this week. So yeah, I'll submit my own ideas, but whatever the community would like to do, they are free to do so. Thank you so much. Thanks everybody. Have a great Thursday and a good weekend, and we'll see you next week again. All right. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.